So I'm going to walk through the documents that we're going to be using for writing about education in Sparta. Did the strengths outweigh the weaknesses? The easiest way I find to annotate the text in this case is to sort of color code it almost. For example, if you wanted to do, say, your strengths in green and weaknesses in red, that would be kind of a good place to start. So we're going to label strengths, and we have weaknesses. Okay. So color coding is going to help you more easily see what you've annotated, and then when you go to do the writing part, it just kind of stands out to you more. You'll have your notes on the sides, and you don't need to answer any questions underneath it, although it always helps to kind of glance at the questions just to get an idea of what some of the main points are. So it says, a Spartan father had no right to decide whether to rear his newly born son or not. He was obliged to take the baby to the elders of his tribe for inspection. If they were satisfied he was strong and healthy, they gave it back to the father. If not, they ordered it to be exposed, meaning left outside to die. Okay, so definitely want to use some of that information. Now, in deciding if this is a strength or a weakness, it is completely subjective, meaning it's your opinion. It depends on how you perceive things. Now, looking at it from somebody in today's day and age, you would think, oh my God, they are leaving infants outside to die. It's not the infant's fault that they're born weak. Sometimes things just happen and, they're just killing them, right? So if you were to say, for example, that this is a horrific thing, obviously should be a weakness and not a strength of education in Sparta. Okay. You also can see the flip side of this. So let's say right here. So we're going to highlight kind of this whole section here. We're going to add a little red arrow. And we're going to make an annotation, so we want to add a note. Again, it says taking the baby for inspection. If they're satisfied, they gave it back to the father to be brought up. And if not, they ordered it to be exposed, left out to die. Okay, so we would consider this a weakness of education in Sparta, because it is unfair to punish babies for weakness when they can't control how they are born. Okay, and obviously you're thinking like, well, yeah, that's a given, that's kind of implied. Now you could also see this from the other perspective. Let's say that you did want to consider it a strength. Okay, if you were to consider it a strength, it might look something like this. Okay, so if you wanted to say as a strength, you could say, for example, this practice allowed Spartans to focus their energy and resources on babies that would grow up to be strong soldiers. Because in all honesty, the more resources, time, food that they spend on these Spartan babies, right, they're putting and, investing these resources, and the outcome is that they're hoping to get a strong, healthy soldier, or if it's a female baby, they're hoping to get a mother that will raise strong soldiers. And if the baby is born with a disability, again, obviously not their fault, but they're not going to be able to perform in that capacity. And so for Sparta, this is a big deal, right? They do this practice because they want to focus energy and resources, mostly food, on babies that would grow up to become strong soldiers. Okay, so again, you can really see this from either perspective. One of the things you have to do as you're reading through these documents is decide, okay, if I'm looking at it through, looking at it through different historical lens. Okay, would I see this as a strength or as a weakness? Again, most of you would probably read this and say, yeah, this is a weakness. This is very unfair, right? If you were looking at it back then as somebody living there, you would probably say it's a strength. Okay, so ultimately you have to decide when you're reading if you want it to be a strength or a weakness. Let's move on. We're going to keep this one as one of our as one of our weaknesses. And let's go on to another one. By the way, if you need read aloud, it is up here in the top right corner.
A Spartan father had no right to decide.
And it will read the whole text to you. So I'm not going to spend time reading it to you because you can either read it yourself or listen to the read aloud. I'm going to pick one other example from this document though. Let's go with, let's do one that I did not do in class. So we have youths in the senior age class of the Agoge behaved like officers, organizing war games for the boys, and in the evening presiding in the mess, which is like an outside dining area. Okay, now you could say this is a strength of Spartan education. So they're basically talking about how they take these kids away from their parents when they're just 7 years old, the sons, and they bond them with these other kids. They don't really know them, right? They're kind of forced to be friends with each other. However, right, you could argue, right, if you wanted to say this was a strength, that creating a culture of support and unity supports the young boys' mental health and belonging. Again, the flip side to this is they took them away from their parents when they were just 7 years old, which is also crazy, right? So again, it just depends on how you look at it. You kind of have to decide, you know, if you look at it in a certain way, is it a positive or a negative? There are endless possible answers that you could have. They also go out and talk about stealing food. If they caught stealing, they were whipped. Some might argue that is an extremely harsh punishment for young boys. Others, on the other hand, might argue that that's a strength because in the future, when they're in the military, if they steal resources from an enemy and get caught, they're not going to be just whipped. They're going to be straight up killed. So it's almost like they're practicing for their quote-unquote future in more of a low-stakes environment. Low stakes meaning that you get whipped instead of killed.